But here's something else that would make China laugh. The global warming religion of elites in the West. Here is the West slashing its emissions at such a huge cost to allegedly save a planet that's actually doing fine. While China, the world's biggest emitter, yes, it makes all these fine noises, oh, global warming, but it is free under the Paris Agreement and everything else to increase its emissions for the rest of the decade. It is getting stronger while we get weaker. We're being played, as is our own Prime Minister. Scott Morrison is about to join a summit on Thursday of 40 national leaders. It's been called by US President Joe Biden to put pressure on the West to cut its emissions even more. No wonder China's all in favour. And Morrison seems absolutely ready to move to promising to cut Australia's emissions by even more, to eventually, it's suggested, to net zero. But last night Morrison gave a speech at a Business Council dinner to make a sound to his Liberal and National Party base that is actually fighting global warming extremists. This is not giving in. He was standing up for the country people against these pampered inner city radicals.
We're not going to achieve net zero in the cafes, dinner parties and wine bars of our inner cities. It will not be achieved by taxing our industries that provide livelihoods for millions of Australians off the planet, as our political opponents sought to do when they got the chance. It will be achieved by the pioneering entrepreneurialism and innovation of Australia's industrial workhorses, farmers and scientists.
Look, I'm all for culture wars, but that kind of crude, divisive politics really doesn't do anything except get people cross. And there's not the slightest attempt there to actually explain the real issues, to tackle this hysteria. Global warming is not a great threat. Look around, look at all the dud predictions, and trying to stop the planet from warming almost certainly for Australia means far, far more pain than gain. Joining me is former Resources Minister Matt Canavan, a National Senator. Matt Canavan, how did you read this speech?
Well, look, Andrew, sometimes I think there's wisdom in old sayings. When it's too good to be true, it normally is. So I'd love to think we could cut our emissions to zero, to net zero, not lose a single job in manufacturing and in mining, or have a single farm go bust. But we all know that's just not realistic. As I said today, it's like the 10-year-old kid who gets up on his parents' roof, thinks he's Superman and jumps off. Well, he doesn't have the technology to do it and he falls flat on his face. And look, I mean, I agree with the Prime Minister about the focus on Gladstone and the Pilbara and Newcastle and Hunter. These are the industrial heartlands of our nation. And if we are to go to net zero, that's where it will happen. That's where jobs will be lost. That's where industries will go bust. And that's where apparently we'll continue to ship our natural resources, our coal, our gas, our iron ore, off to other countries like China for them to create their own jobs and industry. And so this is why this net zero target is doubly misguided. It's going to cost jobs here in Australia, but it will also help strengthen the very nation that is threatening and bullying ourselves and other countries in our region. It just beggars belief that we'd go down this route given the threats we face in our region of rising aggression from the Chinese Communist Party.
Look, I feel it's almost a confidence trick, because here is the Prime Minister, by all hints, edging towards even tougher emissions cuts, right? And yet making a speech like it's going to protect exactly the people that are most threatened by them. Because if you're serious about cutting emissions, the people who are saying, oh, don't worry, I'll look after you, they're the ones that have got to get in the neck. If they don't, then a lot of other people are going to cop it. So I just feel a bit conned, to be honest.
Well, all I've asked the Prime Minister. Yeah, well, look, I've asked the Prime Minister before we did go down further cuts in emissions that we'd see the modelling and the estimation of the impact on Australia. And a commitment was given to our party room that we'd see those figures, just like we have before. We have taken other action under Paris and Kyoto. I mean, you mentioned New Zealand earlier, and New Zealand did have at least the guts to do some proper economic modelling on what a net zero target would mean for their economy, and it makes for pretty sober reading. In their modelling, they'd have a reduction in employment of huge amounts. If it was equivalent, if the equivalent percentage reduction in Australia was was to occur, something like 200,000 to 400,000 Australians would lose their jobs. There'd be a massive loss in income. I mean, you just can't get around the fact, Andrew, that our wealth comes from activities that do generate large amounts of carbon emissions. That's why, in per capita terms, we are one of the largest emitters. Now, we supply the world with energy, with food, so they can consume at high levels, and I'm proud of that. But we've got to be realistic here. If we go down this path, if we get hoodwinked into this, it will come at a large cost to Australia. And unfortunately, we all know that whatever lip service China gives to this summit this week or commitments they make over the years ahead, we know they're not going to live up to it. We know that. We saw that last year. Last year, China said they were going to go to net zero by 2060. Instead, in the same year last year, they installed 36.9 gigawatts of new coal-fired power stations. That's nearly double what we have installed here in Australia. It is plain before our eyes that we cannot trust China right now. So why would we sign another global agreement with them for which trust in them is integral to meeting the objectives of the agreement?
Well, here's another thing, of course, that we all know is that whatever we do, cutting our emissions, it makes absolutely no difference to the climate. Essentially zero, said the former chief scientist. See, and this is what I don't get, Matt. Why is it that the Liberals especially, they refuse to actually argue on the science and the evidence? I mean, they refuse to say, where are these predicted disasters from the climate models? Where are the empty dams that were predicted, the drowned islands that were predicted, the permanent drought that was predicted? They seem too scared to mention even the obvious. So that makes them always look shifty, and they will always give in. They're going to give in again.
I mean, Andrew, I don't think we have to argue the science. We just have to describe the science. I mean, the science says that those natural disasters are not increasing. That there's no evidence of increased cyclone or flood risk. Even bushfires, it's ambiguous if you read the actual science about what might happen under different climate change scenarios. Likewise, as you've said, in terms of the temperature increases, they've been well under what models predicted. I mean, I've always been someone who accepts there is a link between increased carbon dioxide emissions and temperature. It's just a big question mark over how significant material that link is. And in terms of looking around the world and thinking about what the biggest threats to our peace and prosperity is,
it's not only how strong that link is, it's also whether the warming we're expected to get is good or bad. And right now we've seen a greening of the planet.
Well, I was sort of encapsulating that as well.
Crops.
Yeah, that you're right about that. Yep, you're right about that. What's the impact is very much, there's a lot of uncertainties there. But what I think is much greater, much more known of a risk and a threat right now is that we see China has designs on Taiwan that has huge ramifications for global peace and security in our region. Over the past 20 years, we've allowed our manufacturing sector to be holed out. It's in a very sorry state. And really, what shouldn't the priority for us be right now to restore our strength, restore our military, build back up our industry so that we can make things again, and ensure that if this storm is to hit our region, that we're in a much better prepared situation to do that. As I said earlier, targeting net zero emissions will not put us in a stronger position to stand up to the aggression of the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, it will probably make that aggression more likely because China will feel that they're, in relative terms, stronger and can take more aggressive action if the rest of the West has been so silly and stupid, but to tie up their manufacturing and industrial capability to the benefit of China.
Matt Canavan, I'm actually out of time, but just quickly, bottom line, if the Prime Minister does come out of this summit with Joe Biden and China and all that and promise even deeper cuts, what will the consequences be in terms of the reaction from you and a number of other colleagues of yours?
Well, I can't speak for others, Andrew, but I've said before, I'm opposed to net zero emissions for the reasons I've outlined in your program. We were elected at the last election with a mandate not to pursue more aggressive carbon emission cuts that had already been agreed to. Those were being put forward by Bill Shorten, and he was absolutely rejected at the election. And now apparently, because the United States has elected Joe Biden, we all have to change. Well, I know there's a lot of controversy about the US election, about who voted and where it went and all that. No Australians voted there. We didn't get a vote. We did not get a vote on the US election, and I don't think it's right for Australians to have to be bullied into action by any country, including a good friend and ally like the United States.
Matt Canavan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew. Have a good night.